Afreilichen Purim. Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 490, special Purim edition. Purim, the most festive, most celebrated day of the year, a day when we celebrate Simcha Adelo Yada, beyond super rational, beyond all the parameters and all the boundaries and all the structures, due to the transformation from the darkest moment to the brightest. V'napachu, a complete reversal. A day that could have been the worst possible a day of total genocide of anoshim, noshim, betaf, men, women, and children. All the Jewish men, women, and children in the Persian Empire, where all the Jews lived at the time, in the 127 nations of Achashverosh's empire, Mehoidivat Kush, and instead of that, it became a day of tremendous celebration and the destruction, annihilation of all our enemies who were plotting against us, beginning with Haman himself, the archenemy of Amalek, Haman Hagogi. And ever since, we celebrate every year Purim, this great miracle, which happened Melubish, manifest in the laws of nature. If you looked at more of living during that time, you wouldn't have noticed it all. Many different events that seemingly could have been defined as random, happenstance, all came together and connect the dots. You see the pattern of a tremendous invisible hand of God's choreography, orchestrating this great miracle. And the lesson is obvious. Precisely because the miracle didn't happen in a supernatural way, meaning supernatural as in the suspension of the laws of nature in an obvious way, that's his powerful lesson. That even when you don't see open miracles, miracles are happening. And they're the greatest ones of all. The ones that are happening in the so-called garments of our daily events. How many miracles are happening right now in your life that you don't even notice? Ein bala nes marke benise. And we're talking about the war with our enemies today. There you have the lesson of Purim, the most obvious lesson. Just like Bayomim Mahem, just as in those days, Bizman Hazeh. So too now, Hayomim Ma'ilin Niskarim V'nasim. These days we remember and we recreate all the events that happened then. So in the Haman of our times, the Hamas of our times, and other enemies, those that are either fighting physically, and those that are fighting ideologically, whether it's in governments, whether it's in the UN, whether it's in the United States government, or others, for whatever their distorted reasons, whether it's blatant anti-Semitism, masked anti-Semitism, the fear, all about power, who's going to control. All of them are essentially the Haman of our times. And we're not saying that in order to be vindictive or to accuse anyone of anything, just to know clarity, where you stand. Haman was very clear where he stood. Just like Hitler, Yamach Shemai, was very clear where he stood. You'd rather know your enemy than not know them. And then you can deal with it. And the Jews dealt with it. Firstly, by standing strong with tremendous Jewish ge'in yankiv and pride. Mordechai lo yichre v'lo yishtachve. He would not bow. Everyone bowed to Haman. It was worth it for them. Just like today, people bow because of their own interests. But we stand strong and we do not bow. And we do not compromise ourselves, especially when it comes to our very life, our very survival. And we stand Yeshna Am Echad, exactly as our enemy said. There's one nation, Mefuzer Mofedet Ben Amim, that spread out among all the nations. We're an Am Echad, and we stand as one. Leich Knesh Kol HaYehudim, as Esther said, to gather all as one, despite our differences. And in that oneness, in that unity, we stand with that pride, we stand with that Mesiras Nefesh, that we do not bow, even though it may make sense to some. They bow a little, compromise a little. No, that's not how you prevail. And who prevailed? Mordechai prevailed. The Eden, Mordechai Yehudi. From the word Yehudi, Hoide, acknowledging Yehuda, acknowledging acknowledging God, and Kefer B'Aveidah Zarah, and denying anything that is antithetical to God. That's what kept the people strong, and that's what brought down the blessings that ultimately we prevailed. All four expressions: simcha, joy, and celebration, and honor. Yikar translated as honor. And of course light, the beginning of all four, the light. So darkness was turned into light. Sadness was turned into tremendous joy. And so too will it be now. That's what Purim teaches us. And it's interesting, this tragic episode began on Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael, the other great day of celebration. Celebration that also shows that we're indestructible, that even after the breaking of the tablets, which came as a result of the golden calf, we reach a place, even a more powerful place, that can never be destroyed. And all that teaches us the lessons for today. So Purim could not be more relevant than our times. And indeed, even when the enemy sees the joy, the celebration, it's intimidating. You see, well, look at the confidence they have. And our confidence is not one that's coming from nowhere. It's coming from this historical event, and throughout history, that when we stood strong and we stood together with God, and we allowed God's blessings into our life, nothing can vanquish us. On the contrary, we don't just eliminate the enemy, we transform into tremendous joy and celebration. And for those that wonder, is it that we celebrate the destruction of enemies? No, we prefer no enemies altogether. We prefer it never happen. But if it comes our way, it will only bring out our deeper strength. And indeed, the same gallows upon which Haman was hung, upon the same gallows which Haman prepared to hang Mordechai, he himself was hung. Again, the ishapcha, the transformation. So first and foremost, we need to understand Purim's lessons for today's times in giving us even more strength and unwavering fortitude in forging ahead and prevailing. And it's our combination of fighting the physical wars as they were fought then and the spiritual wars, both by Esther and Mordechai, by the Eden, the fasting, the prayers, Mordechai gathering the children, and so many other things that were done, the general Mesiras Nefesh of the attitude of the Eden at the time. So combining, that's what creates the formidable ability. And ultimately what's prevailing is not just the Jewish people, it's what God wants. A people that continue to make a Kiddush Hashem and bring godliness to every corner of the world, which of course is the ultimate objective. So that's our overall lesson from Purim for our times. And now we'll focus this special program in honor of Purim, being that it's Purim tonight, the conclusion of Purim, but leading into Shushan Purim. And we know in the Megillah there's the 14th of Adar, which leads into the 15th of Adar. So we're all in the spirit and the energy of Purim, which this program would be dedicated to all of that. I want to read the dedication. This program is dedicated in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes, Allah HaShalom, and Emerita Baruch Ben Yom Ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukusil Ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Taders Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. There's an expression that's about Purim, Kol HaPeshit Yad Neisnim Lei. Anyone that extends their arm, their hand, they stretch out their hand, is given. Neisnim Lei. In other words, no one is denied their request. All our wishes are fulfilled. And this is because Purim, all the channels, all the blessings, all the doors are open. And of course, it refers to each other, it's the context of charity and tzedakah, but it also refers to Hashem, that when you turn to Hashem, Hashem will open all His doors for you. In the year Tavshin Chavav, one of the classic years of Purim Farbrengen, 1966, at the end of the Farbrengen, that's what the Rebbe said, Kol HaPeshit Yad Neisnim Lei, began giving mashka to anyone who stretched out his hand. People came with cups. It was such a mayhem. I heard from people who were there. The Rebbe was trying to make some say that, but you can imagine the Rebbe is saying that all the doors are open. No one will be denied. So the first lesson is, of course, to us, this is a tremendous opportunity. And we have to use the opportunity. We shouldn't be bashful. To ask for all the blessings that we need. Starting with our personal lives. And healthy children. Nachas from our children. Health in general. A livelihood, expansive, abundant. And all the blessings that you feel you need, and those that you may not know, you say to Hashem, and the things that I don't know, please bless me with them as well. Someone comes to you for something, do not hesitate to help. This is a time where you have to be, there's no such thing as saying no to someone, God forbid. Some say the Dir Yad is also Yudalad, the 14th of Adar, Yad, which leads into the 15th, which we'll talk about as well in this program. And there's so many other lessons of Purim in the context of unity, the context of our children. I'll try to cover some of them. We've already discussed some of them last week. Obviously, it's limited time, but let's try to concentrate and focus and utilize this tremendous day to the fullest in this year, Tovshin Pei Daled. Since we're talking about this Tavshir Chavav, so I'll share a story or two of that evening. So the Fabrengen began 8:30 in the evening. It went till around 3 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, started the Rebbe giving out l'chaim. People came from all over. As the Rebbe was walking out, he continued to pour l'chaim all the way to coming to his room. He was still pouring l'chaim for those that came. Then he went out to the car to be driven home. And he was continuing to pour, and people were all over. They jumped on the car to the point that the car broke. So they had to take the Rebbe with a different car. All people followed the Rebbe all the way to his house. And he was continuing to pour. It says, everyone extends their hand, stretches out their hand. So a few interesting stories that happened at the time. There was one young bocher, student, who went by, and he got his l'chaim. Then he came again for another l'chaim. The Rebbe recognized that he came, and he said to him, we gave you already. So he said he had a hole in his cup. A lochin cup, that's what he said. Got a lochin cup. A lochin cup is a combination. Loch means a hole in Yiddish, and cup means the cup, his cup. But cup also means the head. So when we say a lochin cup means a person has a hole in their head, like they're missing something. So the Rebbe said, if you had a lochin cup, was it helpful to get my zweiten Mal? If you had a lochin cup, meaning something missing, how will it help if I give you a second time? Of course, you could also read, if you have a hole in your cup, obviously he would say that I came with a second cup. That was one story. Another story that I heard, and we'll learn a lesson from all of these in a moment. There was someone who went outside already, and he hadn't gotten l'chaim, and he was trying, but with all the pushing, it was very hard for him to hold his cup steady. So he kept on shaking. And he said the Rebbe followed him with the Rebbe's cup until they met, so to speak, and the Rebbe balanced out his shaking by the Rebbe moving his cup to adjust to be able to pour him the l'chaim. And the third story, there was someone that didn't have a cup, and he put his hands out, and the Rebbe said, you have to have a keli, you have to have a cup. So you can learn 3 lessons from these 3 different episodes that all happened that Purim, Tavshir Chavav, 1966. Number 1 is, you have to have a container. You can't just say, bless me. You need to have something to hold on. You have to do your part. The blessings come in the containers that we create. You have to have your pockets. You have to have a basket. You have something to hold it on. So Hashem is going to pour shower blessings on you, but what's going to contain it? It won't spill out, God forbid. So you need a keli. On the other hand, the keli has to be complete. You can't have a loch in it. You can't have a hole in the cup. And that also means to be an intelligent person and understand the blessings, and that you should have your mind with you, your wits with you, to make sure you're able to contain the bracha and get what you need, and you don't have to come again and go overboard here. Everything has its time and its structure. And finally, even though we may not be able to always create a keli perfectly, because our hand is shaking, or we may be limping, and I mean that also figuratively, we don't have everything worked out. We did our part. You're esbektani, you tried your part. The Rebbe will already meet you halfway. And even if your hand is trembling or something else isn't working perfectly, you made a keli, now I'll fill that keli. And the Rebbe will accommodate, just like a parent will bend down and hold the child's hand to make sure to adjust and accordingly to make sure that we get what we need. So it's a tremendous lesson in Purim itself, in the Kol HaPeshet Yad Nesim Lei of making kelim, and what we need to do while we're also being blessed from above. So to say, hey, I just have the blessings, I don't have to do anything, that's not the way. On the other hand, just on my efforts and that's all, also not. It's not Keiche V'Eitzim Yadi. It's all the blessings from above. You have to do your part. When you do your part, the Eibishter and the Shliach, the Rebbe, will do their part to fulfill and fill your container. And the more you do in your part, the more the container can hold and more it will be able to absorb and retain. Okay. So let's now go. Many questions came in. We spoke about the central theme of Purim and its power that it gives us, also what's lessons to the war today. We also now spoke about Purim as far as how you create a container for creating a container and the great blessings of Purim, and how you create containers from it. And we'll try to go in some form of an order here. Many, many questions. As I mentioned last week, hundreds of questions came in by now. So I can't cover them all. I tried to consolidate them into categories. Some we covered last week, so you can go back to last week's program, and some we'll cover this week. In addition to all the previous years of Purim programs of My Life Chassidus Applied, it's already the 11th year, so it's 11 years of Purim programs. Go to chassidusapply.com and you can find all the previous programs if you're interested in hearing and reading more and listening to more on these topics. It's also an opportunity, chassidusapply.com, that's where you can present and post any question as completely anonymous, confidential, at chassidusapply.com. There's a forum there, as well as these archives and so many other resources. Please take advantage of that. Can Megillas Esther be translated as the revelation of the concealed? Can the words Megillas Esther be translated as the revelation of the concealed? If so, would it make the Megillah a great book, great source book of Pnimius HaTorah? An interesting thought. I haven't thought of that before. So we know Esther comes from the word Haster, Aster, Panai. The Gemara says, Esther min HaTorah minayin. How do we know Esther is in the Torah? And everything you see from there is in the Torah, meaning in the Chumash. It says Haster, Aster, Panai, from the word Hester, concealed. Like we talk about Malchus. Hester is Shoshana. Malchus, less than Magam Klum, it's concealed. Like the moon. It needs the light from the sun. And the other explanations in the Haster, the concealment. In addition, of course, the Megillah itself is Hashem's name is concealed. Esther was concealed from Achashverosh. He did not know her identity. She was like a secret agent that ultimately would help play an instrumental role. That's why the whole Megillah is called Megillas Esther in the miracle. But the Taich Megillah, from the word Gilui, Megillah means a scroll, but it also from the word you can interpret Megillas Esther, revelation of the concealed, the Megillah of Esther. I have not seen that. Maybe it says in the Sfarim, but it's an interesting thought. And indeed, that is the story of Purim. The revelation of the concealed hand of Hashem gets revealed. So I see no reason why it can be interpreted that way. And would it make it a great source of Pnimius HaTorah? Well, in general, firstly, all of Torah has Nishmasa Daraisa, the Pnimius and the outer dimension. Especially the Megillah. When you read the Megillah, you see so many different things that clearly there's a whole Pnimius within it. And then, of course, when you learn the Maimorim of Chassidus, starting in Torah from the Alter Rebbe, the Maimorim of Megillas Esther, and then the Mitler Rebbe Shari Eira, on Purim. And the Tzemach Tzedek has a whole sefer on Megillas Esther. And the same thing with the Rabbeim afterwards, each in their time, said Maimorim on Purim connected to the themes of Megillas Esther and Purim. So you have a whole Primis HaTeira revealing the whole dimension of Vahi B'Me'ach HaShverish and all its deeper meanings. So that's another question. Why is Purim named after a lottery? We know Hapur Hu HaGeirel. The word Pur in Persian, ancient Persian, comes from the word Geirel. Why? Because it says, the Megillah tells us, that Haman threw lots. He threw a Geirel, like a lottery. He decided what day is he going to choose. So what did he do? He threw a bend. He put together many different days, and it fell out on the month of Adar. And he celebrated because he says the month when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away. Little did he know it was also the month when Moshe was born. But it seems like a strange name to give a holiday. There's so many names you can give it. I mean, the Megillas Esther. Chanukah is Chanukah Samazbeach, Chanukah Samaneh, the dedication, the rededication of the temple, of the altar, of the menorah that was desecrated. But why name it after Pur? A Geirel that Haman, the enemy, threw lots. Why is it even relevant to know how that happened? To the point that it becomes the name. So Chassidus answers the question. And it answered with the connection also to another holiday that's seemingly connected to that word. Tikkun Ezra says, Yom Ha'Ki-Purim. K'moi Purim, Kippurim. Now we know Kippurim means a day of atonement. Kippur from the word kapara. But there's also the meaning Kippurim. And there too we find lots. The girdle that's thrown about the seh, which seh would be Lazazel that would be thrown off the mountain as a kapara, and which seh would be brought into the Kodesh Kadosh, into the Beis Hamikdash by the high priest. So there too you find the girdle, but seemingly, so what's girdle? I mean, what's the connection? They threw a girdle for which seh, which animal would be used, and here Haman threw a girdle. Now, clearly, there's more going on here. So Chassidus explains. Firstly, the Tshuvas HaGe'enim is known, where it talks about girdle. The girdle, ach begirdle yichalikas ha'aretz. So the Torah talks that one of the ways to divide Eretz Yisrael when they came to Eretz Yisrael was through a girdle. They threw lots who would get which part. There were other ways to divide, but that was good. So what's girdle? You can think as a random thing. It says in Tshuvas HaGe'enim that the girdle is as sacred as the Aseres HaDibros themselves, because Hashem is involved. It's not random. There's no random things. The girdle is saying, I am not going to use my logic. I'm going to rely on Hashem, so I'll throw a girdle, and Hashem will decide through the girdle. But on a deeper level, Chassidus explains that girdle refers to the chelik of the neshama and the chelik of ishtalshelus that's higher than Seder ishtalshelus, higher than the structures of logic. L'mayla metam v'das. That's what a girdle is. Tam v'das means you decide. This one deserves this part, you give him this part. This one deserves that part. Or you make a calculation, what day in the year is the best day to designate something. In this case, I don't even want to say what, but Haman wanted to designate something terrible. She looked for the best day strategically. That's a logical calculation. When you go to Geirel, you're going into a place that's beyond, we call the supra-rational. Now, the supra-rational is a place that's beyond the structures. Now, on one hand, that's a tremendously powerful place, but it's also a tremendously sensitive place. Because when you talk about that level, with kechashecha ka'era, where darkness and light, you're beyond darkness and light. You're even beyond good and evil. Not because, God forbid, there's evil. You're beyond all these levels. So that's reaching Purim ad lo yada, ben Arad Haman Baruch Mordechai. How could you say that? Arad Haman is a cursed Haman, Amalek. We saw what he wanted to do. How could you even equate the two? So Chassidus explains it's not equating the two. It's coming to a level, well, even the negative things in life are also all meant to bring something positive. You come to a point where you don't see the distinction between different experiences in life. Everything is gamzu l'teva. Everything ultimately is coming from a divine place. And it's the growth that we grow through even the negative things in our life. Like the concept of tshuva. Avedus tzaddikim is an aveda. This is what you're supposed to do. This is not what you're supposed to do. A Baal Tshuva is someone, God forbid, who transgressed, and yet through the transgression he's come to a deeper love of God, to the point he's come to a place that even the transgression could also be turned. What does that mean? That even the deliberate sins are transformed into merits. Doesn't mean the sin itself. The very negativity, the evil of the sin, that's destroyed. And its destruction is its repair. But the sparks that were trapped there, as Chassidus explains, that's elevated. So how's that possible? If God created a world where this is right and this is wrong and this is good and this is bad, and this is light and this is dark, because at the end of the day, God is higher than light and dark, and higher than all these structures. And when you do tshuva, you're able to access a place in the Baal Haratzon that's higher than the very structure of his God's own plan, which is what Moshe did in Yom Kippur. Even though the sin, the terrible sin, one of the three sins you're supposed to die for. That's why Mordechai would not bow to Haman, the sin of the golden calf. And yet, Moshe was able to reach a place even deeper. Not deeper where, God forbid, you can do it. You can sin. A place that transcends and precedes. It's like going to a person, God forbid, let's say, gets hurt and injured. And people say you can't do anything about it. He's injured. No, but through surgery or through other methods, you go deeper into the person's immune system and are able to extract and draw out, with a stem cell example or other examples, a place that was deeper than the wound. And it's beyond the difference between the dark and light. That level. The Masein Shel Sadikim or Masein Shel Rashaim. So, of course, the question, what does it mean? He doesn't know. He can't. The Eibush is beyond distinguishing between Sadik and Rasha. No, it's a place that's beyond structure, and that's where Chofetz b'Masein Shel Sadikim. So Purim, Megillah represents, Haman was not a simple man. He was a sorcerer. Like Pare before him and like others, he had great power. It was very negative power. It was demonic power. But he understood things. The Megillah by him was not some little game. He knew that he's accessing these powers. So Chassidus explains that there's two ways that the Unikas HaChitzenian, the negative, the Klippas can glean their energy. One is through many tzimtzumim. Like you see, where the maggots gather, they go where it's dark. Where the light shines, they run away. They go where shemamis yudayim tetapesh. The spiders will come to eat the scraps where nobody's watching, so to speak. This is tzimtzumim. So much concealment, that's where they come. Where the light is shining, where there's a lot of protection, like with bacteria, infections, will not infect a healthy body, generally speaking. But God forbid, once the soul leaves the body, they will come to attack because now it's vulnerable. So there's the tzimtzum, the chayas is not there. When the vitality is not there, the energy is not there, that's one way negative energy gains power. Another is through makif, through an indifference. They say by the Rebbe's wedding, for instance, there were many pickpockets. By the king's banquet, often the thieves come. Because of the great simcha, nobody's watching. Not because there's no protection there. The opposite. It's like a certain aloofness, a certain detachment. So that's where also klippas can come together. Haman was trying to reach what's called the level of chetzenius hamakif. That's what Haman wanted. He was arrogant. He came from Kesed of Klippa, the level of Amalek. Kesed is like above the structure of the spheres. In the world of the spheres, the Kedusha, you can't just come in and do anything you like. So you can go either through a place where there's a lot of darkness and no light at all, or you go to a place where there's higher light, not the highest. Because if you go to Pnimius HaMakiv, Chassidus explains there, also there it's very clear the Eibishter wants what he wants. But in a place where there's a certain type of, you could say spiritual detachment in a way. Sometimes the comparison to sleep. When you're asleep, a person is like, not so aware. That's why Belaylahu Nodad Shnas Amel, the beginning of the Tokfish Nes, a Purim begins when the king wakes up. Lamailo, that means Malka Shalelim, because when you're awake, then you're very aware. In a sleep state, when things are sleep state, there's a certain of aloofness, a certain detachment. Haman wanted to exploit that. He wanted to draw energy from that place, the place of Geidel. And that's why Purim is called by the name Geidel. The Ishapcha is the Mesiras Nefesh of Eden that also reached the level of Geidel, but in the form of Gedusha, like Yom Kippur. A Geidel of Gedusha where you reach the Primis HaMakif, even a deeper level of Geidel. And even in Haman's Geidel, we know that he didn't realize, but Moshe Rabbeinu was also born in that month. So it ended up turning around, and it becomes Ada Layada in a Kedusha Dika way. So Haman wanted to create a gallows of 50 Amma to use against Mordechai, against the Eden. And Chamishim Amma is also a form of Makif, the highest level, Chamishim. And that itself was turned around, and it became the Geidel, the L'mayla Metam V'das, the Ada Layada of Kedusha that eliminated and transformed the darkness to light. The tshuva part. So that's one of the explanations given for this topic. So a follow-up question in that, if Haman was accessing a level beyond good and evil, how could he have channeled that into evil? So let me just read it in detail. Why is Purim named after Alari, which is a negative vice of gambling? And the Torah even says someone who's is a gambler cannot be counted in a minyan. Shouldn't the holiday instead be called Chag Esther? Because it was Esther's bravery going to talk to the king that helped us defeat our enemies. So I'm reading the question after I answered it already, but I just wanted to add that point. Correct. Gambling and so on is the klipa in the umazeh of Geidel. Here we're talking about reaching a place, like I said, the Geidel says in the Tshuvas HaGe'enim, that they were talking about a level that's beyond l'mayla metam v'das. Like the difference between shtuz de l'umazeh is the way it's l'mata metam v'das, and shtuz de kedusha l'mayla metam v'das. Okay. So you could ask, why didn't it say that Megillas Purim? So perhaps you can say, because Megillas Esther is also Helen, Haster Aster Ponei, and she was really the cause for the whole miracle, like we discussed before about Megillas Esther. So you really have both elements, the Purim, the Geidel, and the Geidel that reveals, even in the concealment, the greatest Giluyim, the greatest revelations. So now someone asked the follow-up question that I just read before. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, please help me understand something the Rebbe said in a Maimer about Purim. The point of the Rebbe was making was that Haman knew he couldn't defeat the Jews with the energy of the physical world, because in a world with good and evil and light and darkness, even a small amount of light will always prevail against the darkness. Correct. So Haman had to tap into a higher energy of Geidel, lottery, which is a level above Ratzon, in which there is no discernment between light and dark, as I explained before. At that level, the energy of light and dark is the same. So Haman wanted to use that higher level of energy to influence defeating us. In other words, in the world of Ishtalshlus, where light is clearly dominant. So he went to that place that's like beyond light and dark. My question is, how could that plot work if the level above Ratzon, there's no good or evil? Then how could Haman use that level to influence evil against us if there's no evil on that level? And secondly, if there was a way that Haman was able to do this plot with a super-rational energy above the level of Ratzon, then why did his plot fail? So the answer lies in what I said before, and let me spell it out. There's Chetzenes HaMakif and Primis HaMakif. Haman wanted to reach a place of a certain divine, where it says, Im tzadachta matiton le. A certain divine detachment, if you wish. That even when you do good, what are you already affecting? So it's Chetzenes HaMakif, where light and dark are equal. And there, Haman thought he has his niche, he has this opening, where if he can go there, he can then do something to hurt the Yid, God forbid. The truth is that there's a deeper level, and that's how you counter it with the Mesiras Nefesh of the Eden of Loyer, of Mordechai, which is L'mayla Metam V'das too, but that's Pinimis HaMakif. So the number one thing is in Chetzenes HaMakif, unfortunately, yes, Klippa can draw energy from there. So it itself is a level that's beyond light and dark, beyond good and evil. But if it's used by the wrong sorcerer, like Bilam, who tried to curse the Yidden, or Haman, or Pare, it can become a source of energy to evil. That's why you find that evil sometimes has power. Where's it getting its power from? So we said, either from many tzimtzumim, much concealment, or from these levels of makiv. So it's not that the makiv, God forbid, has any evil in it. But from there you can draw, just like the thieves at a banquet, at a king's banquet. On the other hand, it did not prevail because there's still Pnimius HaMakiv. There's still the deeper level. And we had Mordechai, thank God, and we had Esther, and we had the Eden. And that's what countered. They're adamant, and they're, you can say, obstinate even, Amkshe Eirif. Their unwavering commitment countered Haman's demonic passion, and that dug deeper and reached deeper into the Pnimius HaMakiv that can eliminate this Chitzenius HaMakiv, so-called momentary detachment. Okay, another question. Does Chassidus teach that Haman is a representation of primordial evil of the snake of the Garden of Eden? Yes, it does. Haman, as I said, was not a simple person. Haman Agogi came from Amalek. Amalek is Yudeis Rebbeinu Mechavan Limrid Bey. He knows his master and intentionally, deliberately wants to defy him, wants to mutineer against him. So this is so in Yudeis Rebbeinu, Haman, like Amalek. And the original originates from the Nachash HaKadmeni, as does Pare Tanin HaGadol. These are all forces as they manifest from the original negative energy of that Nachash HaKadmeni. The end of the day will be that the Nachash will become a Shamish Gadol Asadlav, will become a great servant toward Kedusha. Like it says, Mibnei Bonav Shel Haman Lamdu Teira B'Bnei Brak. That the grandchildren of Haman ended up learning Teira in Bnei Brak. So there'll be an Isapcha transformation. But at the time, it definitely comes from that negative energy, which explains why Haman could access those higher levels of Makir, like the Nachash HaKadmeni was able to do so. So the Nachash at that point actually walked on legs and had that power, that tremendous power. The Nachash who are Satan, who are Yetzirah, as the Gemara says. So Nachash represents those negative forces, all designated by God to do so. But that's why it accesses that level of Makif. Yeah. Okay. So now let's go back to the question, what is the connection between Purim and Yom Kippur? As someone wrote this way, someone wrote like this: if Yom Kippur and Purim are both connected, albeit each day has a different method to access its tremendous energy. Yom Kippur by fasting and praying, and Purim by being joyous. So the question is, if we want, can we greet our friends on Purim with the Yom Kippur greeting of Gemach Simeteva, to be cute and funny, but also to connect the two holidays? So that does not say in Sfarim that we have to say Gemach Simeteva. They're still two different days, very different days, and very different times of the year. So the key point to remember is that both of them are Achaz B'Shana. Yom Kippur, of course, the Torah says 1 day of the year, and Purim is 1 day. But Yom Kippur is Shabbos Shabbosin. It's even greater than Shabbos. There's no working, it's fasting. Purim is like a weekday. And the Alter Rebbe explains why. Because in the weekday, in the food, in the drink, we mamshich the Yechida, the Achaz B'Shana, the Yechida Liyardacha of the same thing that we're mamshich Yom Kippur. But to say only Purim, no, you need both. You need both. You really need the combination of both. The Rebbe speaks about it in the context of Erev Yom Kippur. That Kol HaEchel, V'sheisa, anyone who eats Erev Yom Kippur, it's Kilu Misana, Chi Vasiri, the 9th and the 10th. Comparing that to Purim, because Purim is Mamshech, the Amshach of Yom Kippur through food and drink. So you need both. You want to have the Amshach that's L'mayla Mishtalshus, L'mayla Machila V'shtia, Elam Habash, Ein Bei Achila V'shtia, that's higher than food and drink, and that itself should manifest in food and drink. In that context, there's a powerful chiddush from the Rebbe, where he brings l'cheda, it says, Elam Haba Ein Bei Achila V'shtia, then we hear there's a Suda L'Asad. There'll be a meal. So the general answer is that the meal is in the first kufa, the first period Moshiach comes. Ein Be'achila V'shtia is in the second period. But then the Rebbe asks a question in his famous Rishima, Tshuvas Habiurim, printed now in volume 2 of Igros Kodesh, But we find sometimes even on the first kufa. Or sometimes they talk about the Suda in the second kufa. The Rebbe brings the different places. So the Rebbe explained there'll be achil v'shtila, but not for eating, not for sustenance purposes, for other reasons. The Rebbe's vart, very powerful vart. In other words, they'll be eating and drinking. Today we eat and drink because that's what we need. We need for our sustenance. And the explanation in the Arizal why food does because it comes from Toyu, so it reaches a higher place and can even sustain Medaber, a human being. There won't be achil v'shtila. We won't need it. But it doesn't mean you can't eat or drink for different reasons. In a way, it's a combination with the Tainug Murgish and Tainug Bilti Murgish that Samach Vov explains. The Tainug Bilti Murgish is beyond any feeling. But you want that itself should be a feeling. You should have the inexpressible, to express the inexpressible, to concretize even that which is beyond the concrete. The combination of both. You don't want to just have the bligvul. You want the bligvul and the gvul all as one. So the combination of Yom Kippur and Purim. Yom Kippurim and Purim. Okay. Now, being that we are also now going into Shushan Purim, which is from the 14th of Adar into the 15th of Adar, and we know what it says in the Megillah. Megillah talks about that in Purim, when all the cities in the kingdom and empire of Achashverosh on the 14th was the victory and the battles they fought, and they finally finished, and that's why we celebrate Purim. But the battles continue to rage in Shushan Purim, the very capital. So that's why it was designated that Purim would be celebrated, Shushan Purim, in Shushan. And from there, Chazal learned also in all Ayoris Mekofis Chema. Shushan was a city that was surrounded by a wall, like it was a capital city, the capital of Persia, where the king lived, the kingly city. So all cities that have surrounded by walls, from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, we also celebrate on the 15th. And there's different opinions about is it the 14th and the 15th. We celebrate the 14th everywhere and 15th, except in those cities that you're not sure, or they're not sure, like Yerichai or Tveria, they're not sure whether those walls stood by the time of Yeshua. So a bunch of questions came in on this topic. I thought it's appropriate, being that we are in between Purim and Shushan Purim, to explain what this means exactly, what's the significance, and also especially from a Chassidus applied perspective. So let's begin with a few practical, technical questions, and then we'll go into the deeper understanding of it all. Why is Shushan Purim celebrated only in cities that had walls since the time of Joshua, Yeshua ben Nun, and not also in walled cities that existed during the time of Purim? Which would seem to make most sense. What does Yeshua ben Nun have to do with all of this? It preceded the whole story of Purim. You could say after Shushan, all the cities that are walled cities. But why from Yeshua ben Nun? For example, the city of Dakt ur Payep in Iran, maybe I'm not pronouncing it correctly, was built with a wall 100 years before Purim, and they would have had a similar situation that the Jews in Shushan had, but since their wall was built a few hundred years after Yeshua, it's not counted. Why? So the Nigladika reason, talk about this, the Bavli talks about it, the Yerushalmi, is covered Eretz Yisrael. Being that the story of Purim happened between the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, and happened in the Persian Empire, Eretz Yisrael is at the center of our minds all the time. So to connect Purim to Eretz Yisrael, we talk about Yeshua ben Nun, that from the time when Yeshua ben Nun entered Eretz Yisrael with the Eden, all the cities that are established with a wall around them, that's what celebrates the 15th. So essentially it's like connecting, like we say, Loma Maskirin Ovis, we're mentioning the Schus Ovis, Schus of Eretz Yisrael. But that still doesn't explain, okay, that's a nice connection, But what does that have to do with the walls? Because that's really the question. You could say Shushan, you celebrate the 15th because the war continued there, and until the 15th, they didn't destroy the enemies. So the celebration is on the 15th of the month. But what does it have to do with walls, and especially walls from the time of Yeshua ben Nun? So let me answer that question. But first I'll answer another question or two, and then we'll get to that question. Is there an advantage to living in a walled city such as Shushan or Jerusalem? Besides the physical protection a wall offers, is there also spiritual protection where it's harder for the Yetzer Hara to get in and cause distractions from doing Torah and mitzvahs? So that's part of the answer. This question will answer the previous question. What is the idea of a walled city? A walled city is for protection purposes. It's additional reinforcement. Which cities are you going to surround with a wall? The cities that are most precious, where the king lives, the capital, as additional protection, pushed on a physical level. Another thing about walls, like we talk about Shmiras HaMikdash, it's also covered HaMikdash. When you surround, when the idea of protecting the Mikdash was not because, like the Rambam says from Gemara, is not because you're afraid of thieves or an attack. It's the honor. Someone of honor has people who protect him, who are like they escort him, so to speak. So a wall surrounding is also a sign of kavod. It's an honor. So it really has both elements. And in Ruchnius, indeed, it's exactly right. It's a spiritual protection. Torah is called a wall. We create gates in order to protect. So whenever something is very precious, you need to protect it. Like we see the human body. The internal organs are always protected. They're protected by layers and layers of a skeleton, of skin, of hair, that protects it from bacteria attacking it. The body itself has a wall around it. The very skeleton and our flesh and our skin and so on, and all the layers. So the same idea in Ruchnius, that for protection you always build walls around. So anything that's very precious, you want to have more walls around it. In a way, it's explained also why the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan had the pareches, had curtains, partitions. Partitions also, besides the fact that a partition is like a filter, but it's also a type of protection around a higher, deeper level, needs another layer of covering. So in that context, Shushan was on one hand a very powerful city. That's why perhaps it took more time to win, but once you win, it has its own power, and that's the connection to cities that are surrounded by wall. But what's the Ruchnizik connection? So let's talk now to understand the Ruchnizik connection is that Purim has a special power when you're talking about the walls that surround us and help us grow and help protect us in our lives. And that's connected to Yeshua ben Nun. So to understand that, let's go back to another question. Can Rabbi Jacobson please give a synopsis of the Rebbe's beautiful sikh from Untitled Esther, Tafshin Nun 5750, where he talks about the Mishnah allowing the Megillah to be read from the 11th until the 15th of Adar, and how the 11th is most important because it represents the last two letters of Hashem's name as it manifests in the physical world. Thanks. Okay. So it is a very powerful sikha, and they find it in several different places. So we know the Mishnah begins right away, the beginning of Megillah. Megillah Nikras, B'Yud Aleph, B'Yud Beis, B'Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, and Tezvav. From Yud Aleph. What does the 11th of Adar have to do with it? The 14th and the 15th we just discussed. So the Mishnah explains. The 14th and the 15th is regarding the bigger cities, is on the 14th. The Krach, that's Mukafus Chema, that's surrounded by walls on the 15th. However, there were people that lived in smaller towns. And there they didn't always have someone to read the Megillah for them. So you have to force them to come in on the 14th and 15th, which was not always the time they came to the bigger city. They would come on Mondays and Thursdays for legal reasons and for different business that they did. So the Chacham were misaken, not to be matriach them, that we allow them to come, when their day they come, they can read the Megillah even on Yud Aleph, starting from Yud Aleph. That's essentially, with all the details that's discussed there. Says the Shalah, but that's a technical reason. What's the spiritual reason? That Yud Aleph to Tezvav, Yud Aleph is Gematria Vovke. Tezvav is Gematria Yudke. So the two bookends of these days, the 11th and the 15th, represent the Vovke Yudke of Shem Havaya. So even though in the Megillah we don't have a Shem Havaya Begoli, we have actually higher than Shem Havaya. So it's Beremes, but nevertheless in Purim you have the hand of God that's higher than the definition, higher than the revealed name Yudke Vovke, and it's hinted to in the 11th and the 15th. And in that order, explains the Rebbe. Because Purim is Mamata Lamaila. You go from Vovke to Yudke. We know, the Gemara says, that, why it say Kimu v'kibla Yehudim on Purim, that they Kimu, they ratified and received the Torah. So the Gemara says, Kimu masher kiblu kfar. That's the Kimu v'kiblu. They are ratifying that which they already received by Matan Torah. But by Matan Torah, it was Kof Aleim Har Kegigis. In a sense, God imposed it out of His great love. He imposed Matan Torah on them. He put the mountain over them and said, if you receive the Torah, He gave them like a condition. So as Meidor Abelar, I said, that left room that someone can say, the Eden can say, you know what, we really didn't accept it completely at our own volition. Comes Purim, and now Kimu v'Kibul, now they accepted it completely, Mamata L'mayla, through their effort. And that's why it's the conclusion of Matan Torah. Resolves that issue. The power of integrating and internalizing, and that's why it's Mamata L'mayla, from Yudke, from Vovke to Yudke, Yud Aleph. And you see it indeed. Those people living in the smaller towns, that's their Aveda, Mamata L'mayla. Tezvav is the ultimate. You're reaching the Yudke, the Shleimus of, you have the Yudke, Vovke. Yudke, of course, is a higher level. But the Vovke starts Mamata L'mayla, from the 11th going to the 15th. It talks there about the Aveda of that. Now, when you look in the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer, there's a Maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, he talks about Megillah Nikras B'Yud Aleph. So he discusses what's the difference. And he brings the famous Gemara on the difference in Yecheskel and Yeshaya. There's in a Ben Kfar and a Ben Krach. Now Ben Kfar, someone living in a smaller city, when he sees the king, he's much more beispailus. That was Yecheskel. A Ben Krach, someone who lives in the king's city, he's not as excited because he's on a higher level initially. He says that's the difference between the Kfar and the Krach when it comes to the Megillah. The Megillah in the Ben Krach is in a Krach in a city surrounded by the wall. That's where the king lives. That's a higher level of Gili, Yudke, Tezvov. The Ben Kfar is someone living in a smaller city where he doesn't see the king. And yet, even there, he also celebrates and also connects. That's Yud Aleph, Vovke. But then, what about in between? We have the cities that read on 14th. Most of us are in the cities that are bigger cities, but they're not Krochim, Bukafus Chema. They're not surrounded by a wall, but they're also not little towns. So he explains that this is the difference between Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. The city surrounded by a wall is Bria, like Serafim. That's the level of Yeshaya, the highest level of Gilui. The cities that when we read Yudalad, that's the cities of Yetzirah, Zah, Mides. You don't have Moichin like Bina Mekanna B'Kursaya on the 15th in Bria. But Mides, Zah, Mekanna B'Yetzirah. So they have Torah, and they have a connection. But it's not quite the same Giluyim as you have it in a city that's surrounded by a wall. And then there's the Kfarim, the smaller cities, is Asiyah. So you have the Srofim, you have the Chayes HaKedesh, and then you have the Efanim. The Efanim is like the small towns, where you don't have that Ispila so much, but you still have the Megillah Nikras, B'Yud Aleph, the Vovke. So you have the whole spectrum covered, B'ri Yitzir Asiyah, as he explains in Eira Teira and Megillas Esther, Mishnah. Okay, so this brings us back to the discussion of the wall. So the wall is more than just a wall. The wall represents a very high level of revelation, as he explains in the Maimer Makif. We talked before about Makif. That you have the Makif and the Shmirah, the additional protection that comes from a Makif, and that's connected to Tezvov, to Yud Kei. Vav Kei is the Midas. Yud Kei is either Chochmah, Bina, or Keser. And that connects to a deeper level. And that's the connection to the wall connected to Shushan Purim. Yeshua ben Nun, because he came, he brought the Eden at the soil. He established the first time building a city with a wall around it. So it's not just because Shushan had a wall. Shushan had a wall because it was a so-called replica of what Yeshua did when he built a wall. Show the chshivus of a higher level, the power of Makif, and you want to also vanquish the negative forces of Makif and bring Purim onto Shushan Purim into the 15th Yud K level as well. Okay, that's briefly a summary of this whole topic. How is Purim considered the completion of the giving of the Torah? So we just discussed that question. Good. Let us go with a few more minutes we have here. Let us discuss. Let's see a few more questions here. Should we gather children together as Mordechai to help vanquish our enemies? It's taught that when Mordechai heard the decree of Haman, he was very, very upset and didn't know what to do. So he stood outside of yeshiva and asked the kids what they studied that day. And they said, Al tira mepachad piseim, and other verses. Do not be afraid of a sudden pachad because the Eibush is with us. And from that, Mordechai was relieved and knew Hashem would help and we would succeed. Can we do something similar today and ask kids for some prophetic words to teach us how to defeat Hamas and get our hostages back safely? Or does receiving prophecy from kids only work if your name starts with Morda and ends with Chai? Obviously, we can and we should. And the Rebbe brought this many times. Lech Knes Kol Yehudim, especially children. The Rebbe brings from the famous Maimer V'Kibla Yehudim Tofresh Pei Zayin. Purim Kotner was in Moscow in very dangerous times. And Friedrich Rebbe spoke about Taneka Shel Beis Rabbam, the Gzeiras against them. And that Mepi Elim V'Yenkim Yisayel Te'ez Lahash B'Sevim Misnakim. That's from the mouth of the children and the sucklings and the young children, the nursing children. That from their words, Einez, Elatera, the Torah that comes out of their lips, that vanquishes enemies, and that Purim is connected to that. Mordechai, who is like Moshe Rabbeinu, as he brings in the Maimer there. Absolutely, this is not about prophecy. This is about, first of all, the power of Hevel Taneka Shel Beis Rabbam, Hevel Shein Beichet, the children that have that power. And yes, the psukim that they say is, why not say that Hashem speaks through them to us? So I don't think we need any particular prophecy. We just need to bring the children, let them say and ask them, what are they thinking? What are their psukim? And that itself will give us direction and guidance and strength to vanquish all the enemies. So it's not just what the psukim they say, but the very saying of the psukim has that power. Absolutely. Okay. If the rabbis can alter the laws of reading the Megillah, like we spoke before, they can by allowing it to be read earlier to accommodate the Jews that are living in the small towns, why can't they decree the immediate coming of Moshiach? The rabbis can alter the laws which explicitly say the Megillah must be read on the 14th of Adar or the 15th in a walled city, and change the rule for farmers who would be inconvenienced by having to travel into the city on Purim to find the minyan. So the rabbis allow the farmers to hear the Megillah 3 days earlier before Purim. Why can't the rabbis make an official binding decree that Moshiach has to come early because all of us are inconvenienced by this long, nasty golus? The answer is we should absolutely encourage the rabbis to do so. The Rebbe many times encouraged the Rabbanim, Amar Malka Akatura, Man Malka Rabbanon, that the rabbis, the Keyach HaTeirah, have the ability to paskin. The Moshiach should come already. So Absolutely, that's what the Rabbanim should do, to finally end this Golus and only have beautiful things. That's the short answer for that. Can we explain Moshiach's imminent arrival with events as they occur during the days of Purim? And to be more specific, it's been discussed on this Sunday show how we can explain the paradox of the Rebbe saying the days of Moshiach have begun, but yet we don't yet have a physical Beis HaMikdash. Yes, we talked about that in the previous weeks, 2 weeks ago, and before that. So this person writes, I'd like to suggest the Rebbe already answered this in a Sikha related to Purim. It's taught the decree of Haman was written on the 13th of Nisan, 11 months in advance of Purim. But the second decree, which rescued us, was written on the 23rd of Sivan. So we see the redemption is potential, that the redemption and potential from Haman's decree came months in advance, even though the actual physical redemption had to wait until Purim. Correct? I believe the Rebbe was saying in Nun Aleph and Nun Beis, Tafshin Nun Aleph and Tafshin Nun Beis, that Hashem released the spiritual and potential energy for Mashiach to come, and all that's left is for us to open our eyes and see it and make that spiritual energy manifest into our physical reality. Can Rabbi Jacobson please give some intuition into this amazing Sikha of the Rebbe? Thank you and happy Purim. I would agree. It is a good example that that even though it was the 20th Chav Gimel Sivan, it took months. So you see that sometimes something begins to unfold until it finally manifests. It's a good example. We don't want it to wait too long. So I don't have much to add except to say we want it already. It's already more than half a year. It's already many years since the Rebbe said those words back in, we're talking now over 30 years ago. And so Ad Mosai, that's what I would add to make sure that this happens already. Okay. Should we now allow Jews siding with our enemies to celebrate Purim with us? So here's how a person writes it. It's unfiltered. It's not my words, it's the words of a writer, but he's expressing his frustration. Why are those deranged and mentally ill Jews who support Hamas and protest Israel allowed to celebrate Purim? Why don't they also protest Purim? After all, there were 75,800 poor innocent Persian women and babies slaughtered because Mordechai commanded us to defend ourselves. My point is, those protecting Israel should be disinvited from Purim parties. Those protesting Israel should be disinvited from Purim parties and Megillah readings. For their own good, of course. We don't want them to get triggered when Haman's poor innocent 10 children get hung from a tree and swing in the wind like the 50-pound bags of wet bird seeds. Okay, everybody has their right to express themselves as they see fit, but the point is well taken. The point is well taken in the sense, yes, you could say exactly the same thing. Haman called upon and had decreed that every man, woman, and child of the Jewish people should be destroyed, similar to the constitution of Hamas. And I don't think anybody would have an issue. Oh, well, I should correct myself. There are people clearly that are completely distorted, if not worse, and that when the Jewish people protected themselves. That's the story of Purim. How is it different now? They're calling on the destruction, They killed so many in the most horrendous fashion, and we're simply protecting ourselves. But I disagree absolutely. We want them to come to Purim. We want them at our meals. We want to give them shalach manas, matanas lavyenim. We want them to become enlightened. We want to educate them, inspire them. Take the story of Purim and teach them. Now, some people may be hard to get through, so you need patience. These are our brothers and sisters as well. Little did they realize that they themselves would have been targeted if they were in south of Israel on October 7th. Little do they know or acknowledge that they would have been targeted, were they in 1930s and 40s in Europe. So it's really tragic. They don't understand that. Start blaming the Jews for the atrocities perpetrated against us, please, and in such manner. Pure self-defense. Create a false narrative to pacify and appease people who want to destroy us. Feel blessed if you see clearly, because there's so many people who don't see clearly. So maybe Purim is a wake-up call, a reminder. That's how I would use Purim, to educate them, invite them to the Seder, let them sing with us, V'hisha Amdalanu. And not because we want to put the light on our enemies, just clarity. What is right? What is wrong? A moral compass, some moral backbone. Just what is right and what is wrong. I mean, enough is enough of this. Bad enough what's happening. To have people, intelligent people, such distortions. It's such a tragedy. And Purim comes to teach us, and maybe that's why Yom Ha'El and the Skan of Vanasim, we need to be reminded. You'd think this was lessons we should have learned after the Holocaust. How could there be Holocaust denial? And yet there is. So clearly we need to be reminded again and again. And it's not that we're dwelling on sins of the past, the tragedies of the past, the genocides of the past. It's to learn from it and not to repeat it, and to be wise and understand what an enemy is. And you have to defend yourself against the enemy, and don't let down your guard, because if you're compassionate to the cruel, you'll be cruel to the compassionate. Okay. So with that, I want to conclude. There's so much more. What can I say? So I'll conclude on a upbeat note. Purim. Well, it's all upbeat. Purim is upbeat. So someone asked about whistling. Did the Rebbe say that whistling is connected to Moshiach and the redemption, and asked everyone in 770 to whistle together? Should we whistle today also to bring Moshiach, or was whistling only appropriate at that particular time the Rebbe asked people to do it? So it's a longer story, but first of all, quite a few Farbrengens already beginning in the late 60s, the early 70s, the Rebbe already indicated people to whistle. This became more common in the later years. And there's indeed a whole Purim Farbrengen, a whole Sikh of the Rebbe on Purim, Tavshin Lamed Vov, 1976. I mentioned 1966. So we'll conclude with 1976, where the Rebbe spoke about whistling. And the Rebbe absolutely connected it to Mashiach. It says in one of the Psukim, time Mashiach, there'll be whistling. If you look in the Sikha Vayeshav Tavshinun Beis at the end, the only time on Shabbos, the Rebbe spoke about Tzarfas, a very powerful Sikha, and he actually indicated the only time on Shabbos to whistle, a few times on Simchas Torah, but on Shabbos. And if you look in the footnote there, you'll see that there's a footnote that sends us to Vayeshev, Ayin Hey, Tofresh Ayin Hey, in Hemshech Ayin Beis, where he talks about whistling and its connection to Mashiach. The last footnote in the Sikha, Vayeshev Tofshinun Beis, which is edited. Whistling like Mefazes u'Mecharke b'chol oiz. David HaMelech. The Rebbe called it a fife of Gedusha, a whistle of holiness. Whistling is like a demonstration of the Adel Yad, of going outside of our regular structures. Michal Bashol found it objectionable that a king, that a person of stature should be making somersaults and whistling and singing and dancing. But that's what Gedusha demands, to go out of our Hagbolas, out of our structures, out of our Tziyur, and reach places that are beyond the Makif, the Primis HaMakif. So, the Rebbe indicated then, this doesn't mean a person just whistle. Whistling is also sometimes a symbol of things that are not necessarily pure Kedusha. People just do that. But the Rebbe was talking about whistling of Kedusha, and of course every Farbrengen where the Rebbe indicated to whistle was all connected to that. So if it's coming from a place like that of Simcha Shel Kedusha, Simcha connected to Purim Suda, Simcha connected to Torah Mitzvahs, then there's room for it. So with that, let us conclude this special Purim edition of My Life Chassidus Applied, going into Shushan Purim. Should be a Freilichem Purim, more freilich than ever before, because we totally transform the darkness that exists right now in parts of Eretz Yisrael. Able to should protect Hine Layonim V'Layishon Shem Yisrael, and B'Layla Hu Nod Shnas Amel, that the king wakes up from sleep and does not slumber, and protects the Eden, especially in Eretz Yisrael, and protects the soldiers who are defending and protecting our men, women, and children, Jewish men, women, and children in the Holy Land, the holy people in the Holy Land. Protect, and Jews should be protected everywhere. Yara Aleim Ruach Memorim. May a spirit of clarity enter those people who may have a lochin cup, who may not see clearly what's going on, It should be like Yehudim, Heisa, Erev, V'simcha, V'sasan, V'yikar. The only joy and celebration for Yidden everywhere, now and forever, as we march into the Geula Hamitis V'Ashlema, Afreilich and Purim. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Afreilich and Purim.
This program is brought to you by My Life Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.